So hello, welcome everyone. We are going to start in a few seconds. So our first webinar, it's related to marine wind projects, which I'm going to present you shortly in a while. This webinar is focused mostly, as you can see from the title, and investigate and give you some insights about some particular issue related to the deployment and to the development of wind farm. And we are trying to present here some best practice and recommendation across Europe, mostly related to the use of the maritime space and the involvement of the stakeholder and all the impact that the wind farm may have on environment, economic development, local economic development, and all related to not only the countries in which the marine wind is actively involved, but also in all the EU maritime space. So without any further words, I'm going to the to my presentation. So it's okay. Sorry, I want to start again. I hope you can see it now. Okay. Can you hear it, or Julia? Okay, so luckily we have subtitles because it seems that the audio was not going on. But anyway, so let's go to the main pillars of our project, the Marine Wind, just to explain you just in a nutshell what we are doing. And we are based in three main fold analyses. So that the policy framework, the social environmental impact analysis, which is one of the topic on which we are going to focus now, and the financial and techno-economic analysis. And we'll go through this with our second webinar. So, but okay, stay tuned. We will give you information about it. So these are our main objectives here. And our main goal is to facilitate the exchange, but of course to investigate of the impact of floating farm. wind farm, of course, and investigating on possible financial framework and solutions that can maybe give a boost to the future implementation of on wind farm, mostly in the Mediterranean basin. This is our consortium, so as composed by partners coming from different countries. Some of them are directly involved in our local labs. Then we have UK partners, Belgium, Portugal, Spain, Italy, and Greece. And our methodology is to involve all the possible stakeholder in every single labs that we have. And this includes, of course, green innovation, industry, academia, public authorities, which has a key role, and civil society. This is our 5 countries where the labs are located. So as I said, UK, Portugal, from which we are taking information of existing plants, and well, Spain, Italy, and Greece, where we are mostly investigating on future wind farm planning. And well, our path is going toward all this single issue, so that the regulation is one of the key elements we are investigating on, so that the society about the social acceptance, and we will have some insight in a while. The finances, because we need to better understand how to give financial support and how to support the investor in this sector. And well, the economics and technology, all these elements together are building in some way the future of the wind farm, not only in the Mediterranean basin, but of course, in the whole Europe. We organized, and we are organizing, a series of webinars, and what we need to know now is to learn about and to give you some insight about our results, and we will get just a bite in during these presentations. We want to engage and further engage not only the local communities, but the whole EU experts and stakeholders with a strong interest in floating offshore wind technologies. We propose to make you better understand barriers and enablers, but we already have a lot of activities, local activities in investigating on these, and of course increase the awareness about the socioeconomic potential and the benefit that came from new floating offshore wind plants. Ongoing activities, and I'm going close to the end of this initial presentation. So we are going toward the survey. We recommend you to participate in our survey, because we still need to collect information and increase our knowledge of the whole ecosystem. So we need your help to improve policy and regulation frameworks, train the public acceptance strategy, and up the environmental sustainability and key technical financial enablers. So it's really important to increase our research activities. Furthermore, you can go to our website and check our WebGIS with a lot of useful information, so including the activities of the project, so what we have done toward the local labs, but not only. So you can find information about the planning of maritime space and much more. And finally, we have our webinar. So this is the first one in which we are now, but we are going the second one on the 19th of May, and will be more focused, as I already said, on financial and technological barriers and enablers, and on the European value chain, which is definitely one of the key issues to favor the improvement of future floating wind farm. Well, going to the agenda we are having today. So this is the very initial part of the welcome session, but immediately after that, Julia will present you a Mentimeter session, which is a kind of warm-up for you and some useful information to be collected from our side. And then we will have the first panel with our internal experts, so Leonidas Parodos and Rosalie Tucker. I will going to introduce them later on the MARINEWIND experience. Then we'll present you the best practice for the Danish energy model, presented by Enrico Carloni from the Royal Danish Embassy. And then the second hour will start with MARINEWIND dialogue on policy for sustainable floating offshore wind technology deployment. We will have a strong focus on social acceptance and environmental aspects, presented by Elena Ciappi from the National Resource Council and Cristina Simioli from Renewable Grid Initiatives. And finally, we will have around roughly 25 minutes of Q&A sessions before the closing remarks. Okay, but without spending other times for the welcoming session, I will give the floor to Julia for presenting the Mentimeter session, and then we will start with our panelists.
So I'm going to share my screen, since we would like to do just a brief icebreaker. So here you can find the instruction to join us on Mentimeter. So you can scan the QR code or just going to menti.com and enter the following code. I will just give you a couple of seconds to join Mentimeter, but then the code will remain on the slide, so you can always join the Mentimeter. So with the first question, we would like to know which kind of audience we have today joining the webinar. So you can select one of the category, of course, the one which best describes you. So we can see that the majority are industry professionals. Then we have civil society, 4 people from academia. Industry professionals are still the majority, followed by academia, 4 people, 3 participants from civil society, and 2 from green innovation. We can move now to the second question. So what are the key environmental concerns associated with floating offshore wind technologies? You have 8 options, and you can prioritize the different options. So we have noise, electromagnetic fields, heat pollution, habitat degradation modification, impact on marine ecosystem, collision with structures, possible spills, sediment resuspension, and hydrodynamic changes, and visual impact of floating offshore wind technologies. So visual impact is at the first place. It remains at the first place, followed by habitat degradation, impact on marine ecosystems, while noise is at the last position for now. I will give you some seconds to continue prioritizing the different options. Addition, modification, and impact on the marine ecosystems are still the most important environmental concerns. We can now move to the third questions. So what strategies can be employed to build trust and acceptance among communities where floating offshore wind technologies are being deployed? Here you can select up to 3 options, and you have the increase of environmental studies encourage and support local businesses to provide operations and maintenance solutions, defining fishing areas or zones. We can see also implement benefit sharing mechanisms and minimize the sea use and coexisting conflicts. The one about coexisting conflicts seems to be the most chosen, together with encourage and support local businesses to provide operation and maintenance solutions. Also foster public participation, which is closely linked also to the topic of today's webinar. Okay, so we have the most ranked one are foster public participation and encourage and support local businesses. We can now move to the second question, the other question, in which you need to prioritize these activities, in particular asking which activity is the most in conflict with the other offshore wind sector. And here you have fishing, environmental protection at the second place, followed by navigation and tourism. Yeah, fishing still at the first place. Yeah, so fishing, environmental protection, navigation, and last but not least, tourism. Now, just the opposite question. So which activity is most compatible with floating offshore wind? You have the same option, but just try to focus on the possible coexistence between floating offshore wind and other uses of the sea. Environmental protection and tourism. So we can see that tourism is no longer at the last option chosen. But fishing, there has been an exchange between tourism and fishing, we can say. And now the very last question. So in your opinion, what are the pivotal aspects to be integrated in policies to support the deployment of floating offshore wind deployment? This is an open question, so feel free to add your input, which can be just one word or one thematic areas. And here, once again, is a question really linked to the topic of our webinar today. So we can see speeding up the consenting procedure, maritime spatial planning, environmental assessment, multiple use, stakeholders engagement, access to finance, regulations, local content, local ownership, grid connection, ports, community involvement, supply chain, once again, maritime spatial planning, incentives, data, security, community support, non-price criteria, KPI for sustainability, environmental protection. So once again, the planning, but also the environmental aspect and the need to really involve the community seems to be priorities also from the policy perspective. So you can continue adding your inputs, but in the meanwhile, we can continue with our webinar. So I will stop sharing my screen and I will give the floor to Riccardo once again.
Thank you, Giulia. Thank you very much for participating to this Mentimeter session. And so then we will start according to our agenda with the first presentation. So, and I will give the floor to Leonida Parolos. He's a project manager at Kuplan International and involved in delivering many EU research projects on, including, you know, the logistics system, the stakeholder collaboration, and advancing sustainable solution in supply chain network. So Leonidas will present a pathway toward the creation of ongoing dialogue with local stakeholder established through the MARINEWIND project and with the GRI case in particular. So Leonidas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ricardo, and thank you very much for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. Let me share my screen to start the presentation. So I will present you today the ongoing dialogue with the local communities, the approach that we have in our project in MARINEWIND, and I will have a focus a bit later in Greece, which is our country. So let's start with a few words about the MARINEWIND methodology. Ricardo already described a bit our overall methodology. So our project, MARINEWIND, aims to contribute to the ongoing dialogue with the local communities by bringing together all types of stakeholders through our co-creation activities. In order to do that, we have established 5 labs in Italy, Spain, Portugal, UK, and Greece, where we have organized 15 physical co-creation workshops. So that means 3 per country. In these workshops, we have targeted various stakeholders, all kinds of stakeholders from industry, academia, public authorities, civil society, and green innovation. And in all our workshops, we've managed to gather more than 660 stakeholders across all the 5 labs. The main approach to bring together all the stakeholders was actually the 15 co-creation workshops. So the main co-creation activity of our project was these 15 co-creation workshops. As you can see in the map, which is extracted from the WebGIS tool of the project, these 15 workshops took place in different locations in all the 5 countries that are hosting the labs. The main objectives of these workshops were to identify the main barriers and enablers on floating offshore wind technologies, to increase the awareness on such kind of technologies, to increase, of course, the social acceptance on floating offshore wind by involving the local communities, and facilitate the communication and collaboration among all the stakeholders. During the workshops, we identified some challenges, and the main challenges, as you can see, were the complex regulatory and authorization process, especially in some countries, in Mediterranean countries, the lack of maritime spatial planning in Italy and Greece, the usually unclear allocation of responsibilities among the public and private entities, which cause a lot of delays, the lack of proper infrastructure to develop floating offshore wind activities, and the perception of that the floating offshore wind is an obstacle to the other uses of the sea. Now, let's focus a bit more on Greece to highlight our approach. So, as I said before, we had to organize 3 separate workshops to bring together all kinds of stakeholders. And so for that, in the beginning, in the first workshop, we mainly focused on increasing the awareness of our project and attract as many stakeholders as possible to get their feedback. After the analysis of the input that we gather during the first workshop, we continue with our second activity, co-creation activity, in a sectoral exhibition, where we targeted all kinds of stakeholders, and especially those that were a bit missing during the first co-creation activity. And finally, as the National Offshore Wind Program in Greece was published, and there were several discussions about this, we decided to go locally So for that reason, we checked all the potential areas of floating offshore wind farms, and we targeted one of the prioritized areas in the island of Crete. So our third workshop was dedicated to the local community in Crete to gauge their feelings and identify their perceptions about the potential of development on offshore wind farms in their region. A few words about the three co-creation activities, the three co-creation workshops. So the first one were organized in Athens in a bigger event. It was part of a bigger event named Greek Offshore Renewable Energy Conference in Athens. And our main target stakeholders were industrial and green innovation stakeholders. And where we came up with some interesting thoughts from the stakeholders. So some of the main key enabling factors to invest in floating offshore wind technologies, as we said, by the industrial partners, were the clear regulatory framework and the development of the local supply chain. Then we moved in a renewable energy tech expo in Thessaloniki, where we targeted mainly academia, civil society, and green innovation stakeholders, so a bit different from the first one. And there we discussed a bit more how to engage with the local communities, and some of the feedback that we gained was that we need more community outreach and educational programs because we realized that the local communities are not well informed on floating offshore wind technologies financial benefits, all kinds of financial benefits. Then finally, during our third workshop in Crete, as I said before, we decided to go locally. So our target was the local community in Crete and the public authorities there as well, where we discussed a bit about their perceptions, and we had a very interesting discussion about the potential impact of floating offshore wind farms on various aspects. And the interesting fact here is that we got a lot of different responses, a lot of different views. So regarding the local economic activities, we had both positive and negative aspects. And the same was about the environment and the potential problems that the potential offshore wind farms will have on the region of Crete. So as you can see that as we go locally, the perceptions of the local people, of the local communities may vary between when you compare with the industrial partners. So as a final remark, some of the lessons learned from all our activities. The first one is that the interests of the various stakeholder groups concerning the floating offshore wind technologies are totally different. And this is something that makes challenging to agree on a mutual approach. Another one is that the level of acceptance of offshore wind farms, especially in Mediterranean countries, is still a bit low, which in future plans can cause local communities opposition for various reasons, for tourism, for environmental concerns, for economic benefits, and for cultural values. And finally, that as everyone is agreed on this, a unified and standardized authorization process on floating offshore wind farms across the EU is very, very important, and this could accelerate the investments in the sector. So thank you very much for your attention. I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end of this webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Leonidas. Thank you very much. So for the audience, you can put the question and answer in our chat. it's already there, so you can just write your possible questions during the presentation, and we will then read this during the Q&A session in the end. So now let me introduce you the second speaker of this panel, Rosalie Tucker, again, one of the partners of the project, is Senior Policy Advisor at Europesh, the representative body for fishing enterprises in the European Union. And she will present today the point of view of the fishing sector, and mostly the main concerns and possible solution to foster the coexistence between the other use of the sea and, of course, floating offshore wind technology, which is the main core topic of our project. So, Rosalie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I really appreciate being here today with you, and I will be giving Europesh's views. As Ricardo mentioned, we are an umbrella representative organization for fishers and ship owners. So our members being national organizations of fishing enterprises, and we represent both the large and the small scale fishing sector. So first I want to stress the sector is not opposed to offshore wind farms. But however, apart from this marine wind project, fisheries are actually often sidelined when it comes to renewable energy. Yet when addressing climate change, the fishing industry should be seen as part of the solution, so providing sustainably sourced animal protein with one of the lowest carbon footprints. So on this slide, you see I first want to zoom us all out and take you to this world map, taking in the fact that the EU's exclusive economic zone is actually the largest in the world, bigger than, for instance, China's exclusive economic zone or the US's, meaning that what we do in these combined EU-EEZ matters, perhaps even more than we thought, and also that how we manage our seas carries a global weight, not just for European fisheries, but for the marine ecosystems and our climate goals worldwide. Next slide, please. So we're talking about offshore renewable energy, specifically marine wind here today. Zooming into this, we see that offshore wind in the EU is expanding and the competition for marine space is intensifying. So fishing grounds are shrinking as energy projects take priority, pushing fishers further offshore. This is increasing fuel consumption, emissions, safety risks. Ironically, actually, then working against the environmental goals offshore wind is meant to support. I'm saying this because renewable energy infrastructure is prioritized close to shore. And the downside to that is that over 80% of the EU fleet is operating close to shore as well. It's small-scale fishing fleets, and they're being pushed into more turbulent, distant waters. So this disrupts the fishing operations, increasing safety risks, forces vessels to burn more fuel, and undermining, as I mentioned, the energy efficiency and the climate targets, but also concentrates the fishing activity in smaller areas rather than having a more balanced, lower impact distribution across the sea. So just to give you like a reality of all these pressures on the sector, because it's not just offshore wind fisheries in the EU, they have to deal with, as you can see in the next slide, please, Brexit's impact, for instance. So we have 30% marine protected areas objective, the new nature restoration law, Natura 2000 sites. So there's a lot of other legislations having a say and an impact into how our marine space is being managed and filled in. And floating offshore wind is often promoted as a solution since it can be placed in deeper waters, and it has a very promising future also in our point of view. It does still require anchoring systems, cables, and maintenance corridors. So it does still have an impact on the marine ecosystems and create this operational challenge for fishers. We can go to the next slide. Blue economy aims to create these synergies between different maritime sectors. In the EU, yet after often in a lot of member states already a decade of discussions, they still struggle to find these viable solutions integrating offshore wind and fisheries, or offshore wind and nature, for instance. Passive fishing gear has been explored as a form of coexistence, and this seems to be working quite well. But to some level, some activities may not be fully compatible within the same space. And therefore, marine spatial planning is really important to strike this balance. And our approach to offshore wind, you can go one slide back, please. Our approach to offshore wind development should be aligned with Article 2B of the Paris Agreement. It's of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, calls for climate action that does not threaten food production. Of course, I have to mention this. But as you already had a sneak peek in the next slide, that too often individual industries are singled out as environmental scapegoats. So the offshore wind sector often, but I took here example of the fisheries sector. You can actually see our previous fisheries commissioner in the EU participating in this NGO campaign against a really big part of the very sector he was a commissioner for. We think at Europes that we think isolating one sector is not the answer. So if we want the solutions to be sustainable, we have to cooperate. So bringing together fisheries, agriculture, energy developers, policymakers, etc. That's what we're trying to do here. In the next slide, I want to mention something that perhaps is not known often, is that the EU fishing sector has already reduced its emissions by almost 50%, nearly achieving the EU Green Deal's 55% target 5 years ahead of schedule. And as I said before, unfortunately, sometimes offshore wind expansion is reversing some of these gains by forcing vessels to travel further away from the shore. In addition, the fleets are improving more to reduce the environmental impact, so modernizing. We're dealing with a really old fleet, so we're adopting energy efficient technologies as much as we can, transitioning to lower emission fuels, improving gear selectivity to reduce bycatch, for instance. And fishers are actively engaging in science, co-management activities, and sustainability efforts. So being quite proactive in this regard. So moving on to best practices. Thank you. First on the left, it's a little example of how not to do it in our opinion. Not all initiatives support coexistence per se. This is the Belgian government flyer that warns that offshore wind farms, they look beautiful from afar, but advises vessels to stay away, highlighting safety concerns that must be proactively addressed, we think, and not per se just warned for. A key solution, as I mentioned, is optimizing spatial planning to reduce these cumulative pressures. In the Netherlands, where I'm from, wind farms have been installed close to shore, and this displays traditional trawlers in this case from valuable fishing grounds. But passive gear is allowed in the wind farms and also passing through. It would be even better if in future projects that the navigation channels are, for instance, wide enough to allow all the kinds of fishing methods that were operating there already to operate safely in the same space. Another best practice I wanted to mention is that in the US, we have mariner notices system that improves the communication between fishers and wind developers. It reduces gear conflicts and enhances safety pre and during the construction of offshore wind. This has been developed by fishers actually, because often the maps shared by offshore wind developers are not super practical to the other users at sea. And this system provides therefore plotter files that can be used in numerous navigation systems, like used by tourism, recreational vessels, and fishing vessels for the safety concern. Then Italy's Emilia-Romagna region also provides a strong example because structured consultations ensure that wind projects there, considering the needs and active involvement of coastal communities, including fishers. And these kind of collaborative processes should be standard practice in Europe, we feel. Next slide, please. So going back, if you can picture this, this huge globe that I had in the beginning of the EU's EEZ, we all have this responsibility and have to chip in to ensure that this marine space is taken care of and used in a responsible and sustainable way. Therefore, just as fisheries must meet strict environmental standards, we also feel that all the other actors in the marine space should do as well. On offshore wind, long-term impacts of the energy infrastructure remain a bit poorly understood. Studies suggest that sometimes the wind investments fail to consider how infrastructure degrades over time. This is posing a risk to marine environment and ecosystems. So fishers are concerned about that. And to protect fish stocks, marine biodiversity, we must address the concerns because the fishing communities that depend on them to not bite the hand that feeds us, let's say. To conclude, so really the socio-economic fabric of fisheries and coastal communities must be prioritized in spatial planning and an energy transition, because we're all moving towards the same goals to be fair and inclusive. For instance, incorporating social benefits into wind auctions could be of help here, and leveling the playing field in terms of standards and having really long-term sustainability goals. And that's why we're part of the Marine Wind Consortium, because we're committed to this dialogue and developing practical solutions together, ensuring that offshore energy is built with and not against the people who rely on our seas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosalie. Yes, indeed. So this is one of the key of our job, with local pilot, but not only, it's for the future development of the floating offshore wind plants. So it's definitely one of the main issue that we have to face in a way or another. So, but and we are going to now to have a presentation which includes part of this of the job, to include all the possible stakeholder in the process. And just because of that, I would like to introduce you Enrico Carloni, from an energy expert at the Royal Danish Embassy in Italy. Enrico will provide an overview of the Danish energy model, which is really interesting for us. It's not part of our consortium, but it will show us the holistic approach for the deployment of the offshore wind, highlighting some pivotal aspects. So the long-term energy policy and planning, which is one of the key elements for us, together with the regulation, market condition, auction mechanism. Technology and supply chain development is another key point for us. And finally, the stakeholder engagement and upscaling. So the benefit for the local communities, it's really crucial for us for the success of the future wind plants. But okay, without any further introduction, so I'll leave the floor to Enrico Carloni. Welcome, Enrico.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for, on behalf of the Danish Embassy, for the possibility to showcase a bit the Danish energy model. As we agreed on, the idea is to give an holistic view of how Denmark managed to build up the offshore wind market in over like several decades. And the first important thing is to highlight that the Danish model is based on bottom fixed technologies, not on floating, and that makes the scenario a lot different when it comes to supply chain development, infrastructure development, ports, and also technology challenges. So there are some quite concrete differences between the two markets, but what I think and I hope at the end of the presentation is that the Danish path can be inspiring also for other and also floating offshore wind markets in Europe. As you mentioned, I work as an energy expert at the embassy in Italy, and our role is to build up knowledge exchange platforms between Italian and Danish stakeholders, and that includes a variety of profiles. We try to simulate the multi-stakeholder platforms that Denmark leverage to make things happen, and I hope also that at the end of this presentation you can also understand the complexity, yet the streamlining approach that Denmark used to have in the past and is trying also to improve. I would say these days they are quite difficult for the whole market globally. Let's start with, if I manage, yes. I try to have this window just to make sure I'm not talking to myself. So I hope that will not disturb the rest of the audience. But yes, the Danish energy model is based on, I would say, a bet that the government and the whole country made in the past. And it was, can we combine energy transition with economic development? Can we combine ecosystem safeguarding and yet changing completely the industrial and energy systems? That was the question. That was a bit a bet since the 90s, and we will see later a bit more details on that. But the results are quite clear. Since 1990s, the GDP grew by 76%, while the gross energy consumption was reduced by 15%, and the CO2 emissions reduced by 45%. The targets yet are very ambitious, and also Denmark increased massively the ambitions for 2030 and 2050. So they still need to work. Denmark still need to work a lot on the reduction of CO2 emissions, so 70% by 2030, and they even trying to achieve a carbon negativity, or to be carbon negative by 2050. So quite high ambitions, and we will see later. And this image just shows State of Green, that is the Danish agency for promotion of energy transition model around the globe. And as you can see, I would like to put it in just to showcase how the public-private partnership is the core of the Danish model, and we will touch upon later. If we look at the Denmark's energy systems today, for sure we see a lot of renewables in the electricity generation. Yet, when we look at the primary energy supply, total energy supply, and the domestic energy production, oil is still quite relevant. But if we look at the intentions in the long term, so for example, the oil products final consumption, we see Denmark experienced quite a reduction since 2000 to 2023, and the oil products are mainly oriented to transport and industry. So the residual part for electricity generation is very, very, very small. This was more to let you understand how Denmark is interconnected with the other EU countries in the northern part of Europe. And you see Germany, you see Netherlands, England, Sweden, Norway. And I think that the main challenge right now is to really understand how to increase the demand of for Denmark electricity demand while developing far more than useful for the energy national consumption. So just is a strategy oriented to energy export, and we'll see a bit what it means and what other conditions need to be met for this plan to be actionable. When we look at the onshore and offshore wind market, here on the left side, you have a bit the positioning of the existing wind farms and the ones under planning or construction. So we have Thor, for example, that will be operating in 2027. We have the North Sea One that relates to the last auction that didn't go very well, but I will give you also some details on that. And if we look at the installed power capacity, 7 gigawatt installed, including onshore and offshore wind, and we look at the objectives and the targets for 2030 and also beyond that. I mean, it's quite a challenge. We are talking about more than 10 gigawatt by 2030, again, is still a challenge for the whole market. When we look at the onshore wind power capacity, we see that the CAGR is quite limited, and also the expectations for next years is that offshore wind is going to be the leading technology to achieve decarbonization targets. Then again, another couple of information on the long-term policies and planning. I think super relevant when we talk about offshore wind is CapEx intensive, technologically challenging, and really supply chain and infrastructure related action. So long-term policies and planning are the first condition to be met for investors to be attracted and to really believe in this market. And in Denmark, again, it was not environment protection, but it was energy security and the oil crisis to drive the energy transition. Again, that really is based on a multi-party agreement. And this is again, I think, relevant also if we compare it to the Italian scenario, for example. So political agreement, meaning that there's a political party that is for nuclear or for renewables. It really depends on the cost competitiveness of that technology, and that is what is drove in the past and is driving Denmark towards the future. Maritime special planning, I have also some extra presentations in the end if you have questions about it, but it's good to see that Denmark met the EU deadlines by 2021, and they submitted the maritime special planning, and that the area dedicated to offshore wind was recently increased, actually doubled. So 30% of these areas are allocated and defined for renewable energy, meaning mostly offshore wind. And if you dive into the different websites from these agencies, you will see that it's quite precise, quite detailed, and it entails also coexistence of activities. And then probably another important factor to highlight, the one-stop shop model for offshore wind. So the Danish Energy Agency is the main agency for the government to work as a good collector of multi-stakeholders, of different stakeholders, so both ministries, the TSO, then it comes to the also maritime, to the Danish Maritime Authority. So it's a collector of, and it's the only interlocutor for Danish investors and renewable developers, and that really eases the work for them. And last aspect on this slide, the market dialogues. So market dialogues are again core. So the industry and the regulators need to get aligned on conditions that are real and are actually attractive for business cases and business plans. And this is actually, it happens before and for the last auction happened also later. So when the auction didn't, in that case, the auction didn't go as expected, and the market dialogue was followed up just to understand the whys and the reasons behind the failure. So yes, this a bit about the last tender, so that I anticipate some of the possible questions. So first of all, I would say that the main aspects. This is the result of a market dialogue. You have links for every slide, so you can again dive more into the specific information. What I think is relevant is that economic challenges are faced by any developer around the globe, and right now, so increasing capex costs also, and low electricity prices in the Danish electricity market. Then for sure the rising interest rates affecting finances costs are also mentioned. And also the model itself, the auction scheme itself is a bit discussed. The contract for difference, as the two-sided contract for difference, as the Italian model, is actually a model that is appreciated more by developers because they risk quite heavily their investments. And then finally, we try to go to the main aspects of this presentation. There are I would say the supply chain, but also the workforce, and also when it comes to stakeholder engagement and upskilling. And this is a bit of framework I defined myself, just to say that I think that in Denmark everything is strictly correlated to the other element. So the workforce deployment and stakeholder engagement and upskilling are seen as a unique thing. And then I will try to show you some examples of in relation to in regards to these elements. As I mentioned before, the multi-stakeholder and public-private platforms are, in my opinion, one of the most important ones. So the idea of having both politics, local communities, industry, so private companies, and port authorities, and as mentioned before, fisheries, R&D, and academia. So everyone is part of the same goal. And also at local level, the same approach is implemented. This slide is quite dense, and I'll try to spend a couple of minutes on that. This is a really nice work done by the Danish Energy Agency and Ramboll on the job creation in Denmark, trying to they investigated what were the main elements, the main conditions, ingredients of the Danish recipe. And those are all listed here. We tried to put some questions. So if there are any specific policies, initiatives, or strategies to support job creation, and then similar questions, and how Denmark successfully created an industry. And what I see again, and I think that I can again highlight same aspects. First of all, a good attitude to matchmaking small and medium enterprises and major suppliers' interests at local level. Then the idea of clustering the organizations and trying to work locally with these clusters to develop on that. For sure, Denmark was quite a front runner on this, and that made it easier. But then, for sure, the focus on specialization, international competitiveness, and cost efficiency. I think again these three keywords. And the open knowledge sharing. So the idea of creating an ecosystem altogether and trying to drive towards the results with the idea of sharing and then standardizing best solutions. Local stakeholder networks again played a critical role, and I think that the next examples are quite effective. When it comes to the supply chain development in Denmark, you have quite a diffused ports and infrastructure ecosystem. and Esbjerg and Odense are among the most important ones, and all committed to really nurture the supply chain in the North Sea. So Denmark managed to be a system builder in the North Sea, and that can be also very inspiring for the Mediterranean scenario. So Italy, for example, could play, or France, or anyone else, the same role. Port of Esbjerg, I think, is quite a famous case. What I think is important is the business Esbjerg role, so the industry association locally, that really helps the small and medium enterprises and other enterprises to create synergies with large companies, large developers. So really help them out to also upskill and reskill the competencies and the workforce. This is a first example, Semco Maritime. They managed to shift from oil and gas to offshore wind within the Esbjerg port. It's quite a good story, and I think that what they leveraged was the oil and gas experiences, and for sure the Danish onshore wind expertise really help. I would say they help along the process. The other case I think is really also very relevant is the Odense port. They managed the steel shipyard to shift completely to wind manufacturing. So Odense port was based on steel production, and after the 2008 financial crisis, they were forced to close down. And the solution was with a public-private partnership to really transform and reallocate all the resources and the competencies towards this new end use of the whole port. And so the whole service model, business model, and the whole infrastructure plan for the port was changed for this reason. Yeah, this is an example we can skip. It's you well know that developers need to engage with the local companies, and for the Hannold wind farm, 32 local companies were involved, and I think that is really key for floating offshore wind as well. The idea of again engaging and with the small and medium enterprises and creating local industrial ecosystems that work efficiently. Then the relationship with fisheries, I think that in Denmark they anticipated a bit the issues, so they try to create a good framework in terms of regulation, so that developers need to land on good compromises and agreements with the fisheries before the project is connected to the grid. And that really helped with compensation models, fishermen engagement, and also part of the same projects in some of the phases of the project. And for sure, as we mentioned before, the coexistence of fisheries activities within the wind farm areas. And again, also another keyword, early dialogue. So let's try to anticipate a problem instead of facing it at the end of the process. That's a bit what really matters. Then I'll try to spend another couple of slides, and then I'll finish my presentation. When it comes to the upskilling, I think the academia and the R&D in Denmark really cooperated well based on similar approaches. So private-public partnerships, always driving also the testing facilities creation, specific courses, and the Ministry of Higher Education and Science paved the way. But then when it comes to the technicalities, so what kind of competencies, what kind of professionals we need, the private, so industry operators, developers are also really the ones making these projects, cooperation projects work. This is DTU Wind. Again, I think is quite well known as well, and I think that these are some of the educational assets, and then I'll present a bit the testing facilities they have. One is the test center in Oosterhout, where many turbines are tested, full-sized, including the 15 megawatt Vestas turbine for offshore wind, and the Float Lab. There is a new project between DTU, DHI, Siemens Gamesa, Stisdal Offshore, and Ørsted and Stroming, and so on. You can read it. But what again is interesting of this project is that Float Lab relates to floating technology. So Denmark is investing in that technology, despite the fact that it's not the core of their development. And secondly, that these labs, this cooperation really work when both, as you can see, O&Ms, developers are part of also of these research programs and so on. And then I think that I concluded my presentation, and if questions arise later, I'll be happy to answer that.
Thank you very much, Enrico. Thank you, because well, through your presentation, we went through so many different key elements that we are investigating in. So of course, infrastructure and port are two of the main elements, to allow the further development of the floating offshore wind technologies all over the world. And one particularly interesting element is the one related to the increase of the employments in the sector, and the conversion of some of the infrastructure to the production of renewable energy. So it's really a good examples of many good practices in all concentrated in one case, or more than one case, also the national case of Denmark. But okay, so thank you very much. And as you said, in case of questions, we come back to you at the end of this webinar. And now I'm very glad to introduce the MARINEWIND dialogue. And I want to introduce Cristina Simioli, the Director of Renewable Grid Initiatives Portfolio of Offshore. So welcome to our webinar. And Elena Ciappi is part of our consortium, a senior researcher at the Institute of Marine Engineering of the National Research Council of Italy, with a background in mechanical engineering. So we with Elena and Cristina, we will go through insightful discussions to provide recommendation for sustainable deployment of floating offshore wind technology. And in details, we will investigate a strategy to engage with local communities, increasing the social acceptance. We already had some bites of this topic, and we investigate at the same time a solution to harmonize the environmental impact assessment across Europe. And finally, the policy actions for integrated planning of floating offshore wind farms. But okay, thanks for sharing this. So I would like to start with the first question, and starting with Cristina. So what could be the key strategy from the policy perspective to successfully involve the local communities in the planning and implementation of wind farm? We already saw with the presentation of Rosalie before, but then even with the very last one coming from the Danish case, that it's one of the key elements, and how the potential socioeconomic benefits stemming from floating offshore wind farm should be transferred to the local community. So, Christina, your view.
Thank you, Riccardo, and thanks for the invitation and the very interesting presentation before this intervention. So just to briefly say that I represent collaborations between the wind developers, NGOs, and transmission system operators across the North Sea, the Baltic, and the Mediterranean. We have basically created this collaboration to work specifically on environmental aspects related to offshore wind and grid developments. It is important to mention that there is a generation part and there is a grid part, as the grid is very much needs to be synchronized, the development with the renewables, because otherwise we cannot make use of the electricity that we generate. And also, if we look at overall the impacts we heard in presentation beforehand, it's not just about the turbines, but it's about the cables, converter stations, landing point, and therefore we should look at the energy system entirely comprising then the grid part. Now, the question that you posed me, I think that requires a premise, and it has been mentioned by previous speakers. And I think that the key aspect of de-risking, because we heard about risks from presenters, either it can be a risk related to investments from the offshore wind industry, can be risk related to activities as Rupesh mentioned. So we have risk, and there is a tool that we have at sea and we don't have on land, and we should make better use of it, and it's the maritime spatial planning. So, which is the tool that actually is meant to de-risk overall the process, is a tool that has, as per the directive, should foresee an ecosystem-based approach, which actually finds a balance between the different activities at sea, but also looks at the good environmental status of our seas, because in the end, I mean, our seas are the one providing us with the ecosystem services that we actually need to survive, and so that it's very important that the good environmental status of the sea is actually kept as one of the main objectives. Now, we have good examples of why this is an element that actually affects then the community acceptance or engagement. And this is, for instance, there are examples of member states at the European level increasingly investing in the stakeholder engagement at the MSP level, because what can be addressed at the MSP level as the identification of the areas, for instance, for offshore wind farms, along with the different group of stakeholders, will most probably then reduce the risk later on. And also the MSP is an important process led by member states and governments, which actually have the authority and the legitimacy to find the solutions, which should not be left only to the later stages of developments of a project and should be then addressed beforehand. France is a good example. In the update of the MSP, they actually engaged in a very thorough and meaningful stakeholder engagement process. It's the public debate, which is part of all infrastructure projects actually in France, but in this case has foreseen the involvement of physically more than 20,000 persons, then more than 400 events, and they received more than 30,000 then feedback to the overall MSP, looking at the different regions and looking at the different sea basins. Why this is important? This was important because actually as the outcome of this process, then further areas for offshore wind have been identified, but also areas for production have been identified. Therefore, this shows us how a community needs to be involved meaningfully from the MSP process. Just as a side note, we often hear that none of the stakeholders groups feel that they have been involved enough in the MSP process, because it's a very complex process. As we are saying, it's a national, regional process, but nevertheless, it's very meaningful. Also, another example is the one from the Netherlands, where they have centralized the identification of the areas. They have actually identified the MSP as the key process. Therefore, this means that centralizing the identification of the areas, and the governments took responsibility also of conducting environmental studies and surveys, therefore further decreasing then the investments for the developers after that. And most importantly, they have identified what they call a multi-use passport. Therefore, the MSP is the key part, is the key moment where actually you can identify the activities that can be combined and put together. That's the early stage. Now, nevertheless, I'm not forgetting about the question about the community benefits, but this was actually a premise that is very important. First of all, defining the community is not so straightforward when it comes to offshore wind, and this applies to bottom fixed and the floating for all, I mean, for both, because of course those are those that live close by projects, but it's also true that for offshore wind, I mean, this can be very broad. Therefore, all solutions needs to be kind of flexible and project specific. Overall, we still face a gap when it comes to metrics and methodologies to assess the socioeconomic aspects. And therefore, I can also now bring you a very promising, for instance, engagement of communities, but metrics are needed because we need actually to understand how the socioeconomic benefits can be created and if and how they are effective. We have an example of SSE renewables, for instance, in the northern of Scotland, where for the Beatrice offshore wind farm, it's a wind farm of offshore wind farm of almost 600 megawatts. They have developed a very meaningful process with the local community because the assumption that benefits bring social acceptance is not always the case. We need to define benefits, and benefits needs to be defined with the local communities. Therefore, this is why there are not silver bullets here. And in the case of SSE Renewables in Scotland, they have invested more than £6 million for local priorities that have been identified with the local stakeholders. And therefore, they have developed different projects, including rural jobs that they have created. They have announced more than 64 community assets. But this is one of the examples where actually decisions on what communities need have been defined with the communities themselves. I would stop here, and I'm happy to answer them to the other questions.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, because, okay, just to write up really a lot of interesting issues now that needs to be well, further investigated, and which can be the guidelines for our research job. But we would like to hear also the view and the perspective from Elena, from Siena. So Elena.
Okay, thank you very much, Riccardo, and thank you very much for the invitation. Well, I would say that I completely agree with Christina. I would like only to add something, which is the result of the analysis performed within the MARINEWIND project related to literature review, also to results of